With Aida, Verdi created one of the absolute highlights of opera history, and Aida offers everything that opera can achieve. The popularity of the work is unbroken. Mass scenes such as the Triumphal March thrill the general public. Intimate scenes such as the farewell between Aida and Radames touch opera lovers. Verdi was almost 60 years old when he wrote Aida. He was retiring but was asked by the Viceroy of Egypt to write an opera for the opening of the Cairo Opera House. Verdi then quoted an outrageously high sum to turn down the request, which to his surprise was accepted. The longer he worked on it, the more enthusiastic he became, until Aida, together with Othello, ultimately became perhaps his greatest work. Verdi created a unique timbre for each of his operas, the so-called tinta musicale. For Aida, Verdi decided on two important basic principles. One is the many duet scenes. While there are only 3 classical arias in the entire opera, Verdi wrote 6 duets, the most famous of which was the final duet, O Terra Addio. The other important aspect is the mass scenes. Verdi had an instrument specially developed for this, the so-called Aida trumpet, which we hear in the Triumphal March, for example. It has a modern outlet which is historically completely untenable for the time. This prompted Verdi's famous bon mot: reproducing the truth may be good, but inventing the truth is better, much better. Another striking feature of the opera are the priests. We hear Ramphis and his priests again and again. Verdi is said to have hated the clergy, and this is evident in this opera. What Verdi has clearly expressed, both musically and dramatically, is that the priests are the driving force behind the lover's misfortune and behind the throne. It's not the king who is the true bearer of power, but the high priest. The judgment scene in the 4th act, which ends with a solemn song of the triumph by the priests and at the same time with Amneris cursing them, can hardly be surpassed in terms of emotional drama. Finally, it should be noted that the opera is ostensibly the drama of Aida. But behind the scenes, this opera is the drama of Amneris. She is the secret star of this opera. She is first the one consumed by love, then the jealous one, later the hopeful one in anticipation of the wedding, then the vengeful one, and finally the penitent. Truly a great ride through the world of human emotions. The leading roles: Aida, slave at the Egyptian court and daughter of the Ethiopian king Amonasero. Radames, Egyptian officer. Amneris, daughter of the pharaoh. Amonasero, king of Ethiopia. Ramphis, head of the priests. The opera begins with an overture. Verdi exposes 2 basic themes of the opera. He begins with Aida's dream of happiness, the love motive. But this dream is opposed by the raison d'etat. The motive of the priests is heard. In a dramatic passage, Aida's love motive clashes with the priest's motive. Aida, the daughter of the Ethiopian king, was captured by the Egyptians during a campaign and lives as a slave at the Egyptian court. War is raging. Under the leadership of King Amonasero, Ethiopian warriors have invaded Egypt to free his daughter Aida. Radames, an officer in the Egyptian army, dreams of returning to his secret love Aida, crowned with laurels from the defensive battle. The role of Radames is written for a lirico spinto, a youthful heroic tenor. Radames is a par force role for the tenor. He has to sing the high B flat 23 times in this opera. including here in the famous ending of this famous aria, Celeste Aida. In the Egyptian capital, the priests call on the Egyptians to resist the invaders. In a magnificent crowd scene, the priests and the king whip up the masses. Aida and Radames are lovers, but their love must remain a secret. Aida is torn between her love for her country and for Radames, the officer of the enemy. Aida is the personal slave of Amneris, the pharaoh's daughter. Amneris is also in love with Radames. And Radames' dream comes true and he is appointed leader of the Egyptian troops. A ritual of the priestesses takes place before Radames is appointed the leader of the Egyptian troops. Radames is ceremoniously appointed commander of the Egyptians by Ramphis. Radames has gone to war and has now been away as army commander for months. Amneris has suspicions and wants to use a ruse to find out what her slave Aida thinks of Radames. She deceives Aida into believing that Radames has fallen. Aida, grief-stricken, confesses her love for Radames to Amneris. Amneris' fears are confirmed. She is consumed with jealousy while Aida mourns Radames. Meanwhile, the Egyptians have managed to hold their ground and fend off the attackers. The Egyptian capital prepares for the triumphant entry of the victorious army, and Radames and the army are celebrated in a grand ceremony. Amonasro pretends to be the spokesman for the Ethiopian troops and is thus able to keep his rank as king secret from the Egyptians. At Radames' request, the pharaoh decides that the captured attackers may return to their homeland. Only Amonasro and Aida are kept as hostages. As a reward, the pharaoh gives Radames his daughter Amneris as his wife. On the banks of the Nile. It is the eve of the wedding of Amneris and Radames. Amneris has reached the destination of her dreams and goes to the banks of the Nile to pray. As chance would have it, not far away, Aida is secretly expecting Radames. She longs for her fatherland. While Aida is waiting for Radames, her father turns up unexpectedly. When he learns that she's waiting for Radames, he presses her to reveal to him the unguarded path of the Egyptian line of defense. Aida refuses, and Amonasro reminds her of her fatherland and appeals to her sense of duty. Aida is torn between loyalty to her fatherland and betrayal and refuses to comply with her father's wishes. When Radames appears, Amonasro hides and overhears their conversation. Aida asks Radames to flee with her to Ethiopia. With anti-sing tones accompanied by woodwinds, Aida tries to win Radames over to her plan. This develops into a tender, passionate duet between the two lovers. Aida asks for an unguarded path. Her father hears Radames telling her the way. Amonasro steps forward and Radames realizes that he has unintentionally betrayed his fatherland. Radames is forced to flee. At this moment, Amneris appears and accuses him of treason. Amonasro wants to kill her, but Radames prevents this. While Aida and her father escape, Radames allows himself to be captured. Radames is put in prison. Amneris has not yet given up hope of marriage and offers Radames the throne and marriage despite the betrayal, but Radames refuses. This duet ends with a grand cabaletta and dramatic orchestra strikes, documenting the drama of this fateful encounter between the two. Radames is condemned to death by the priests by being walled into the pyramid vault. Amneris wants to die out of despair because it was her who handed Radames over to the court. She passionately curses the priests. This scene is one of Verdi's great anti-clerical indictments. He depicts the drama of the unloved Amneris with great gestures, musically overlaid with the judgment scene that takes place inside the temple. Amneris tries in vain to persuade the priests to avert the death sentence, but the priests have no sympathy for the traitor. Radames has been locked inside the walls of the pyramid. He hears a sigh and notices Aida, who has crept into the vault. Aida and Radames experience their farewell to the world together. When Verdi wrote this final scene, he was aware of its significance. On the one hand, it was the weighty conclusion of the opera. But on the other hand, he thought it was his personal artistic swan song, since he was convinced that Aida would be his last opera. Verdi created a magnificent duet and used mainly muted strings and harps to tenderly accompany the exquisite melody of the singing voices.